To this afternoon's panel debate. My name is Paul Fisher. I'm a ex-IT journalist, security journalist, and now I do all sorts of things, one of which is hosting panels for shows like this. I guess before we go on ahead, it might be a good idea if we could just very quickly go through the panels so you introduce yourselves, who you are, and what you do. So we'll start with you, Daryl.
Hello, my name is Daryl Cornelius, and I work for a company called Spirent Communications. We perform performance and performance experts in test and measurement space.
Kevin McNamee, I work for Alcatel-Lucent, and the part of the company I work for, we do network-based malware detection.
My name is Paul Barker. I work for Unify Communications. We're a unified communication specialist.
Phil.
Phil Zimmermann. I work for Silent Circle. We do secure telephony and texting. That's what we do.
Roger.
Water.
Good afternoon, everybody. Roger Jones from Sonus. Please don't confuse us with Sonus, who do Wi-Fi speakers. We do not do Wi-Fi speakers. We do session border controllers and WebRTC gateways.
Thanks, guys. So we're going to have a panel debate. Hopefully we'll have a little bit of time at the end for Q&A. Just like the last session, there will be a microphone going around. If you are having difficulty hearing, because there is a lot of noise out there, please do come a little bit forward. But I'm going to start this debate really with something that I found in my research. Where someone said the scale and scope of UC is far too large and the potential damage to the enterprise too severe for real-time communication to be left unmonitored and unprotected. So that sounds a fairly scary catch-all statement. I just wonder if we could maybe break that down a little. I'll start, Daryl, if you could maybe address that. Is that true?
No problem. I'll view it from our point of view, which is, say, performance and security testing of unified communications in the enterprise space, and we're seeing a fair demand for the performance analysis of unified communications prior to rollout. We kind of get called in at three places to help out. One is to be able to scope and assess which suites or which sets of tools and organizations want to take on. The other time that we get involved is at the point where their hair is on fire and they've rolled it out without testing it, and they're stuck for communications that are not working as they should do. And also the third time that we get involved is in pre-production testing of features and functions as new features and functions are rolled out. And what we see in the unified communications environment is simply that it is critical to the organization's health and well-being that a good, logical, just a first principles engineering approach is taken to the rollout of new technology. Build it, test it, deploy it, and if it doesn't pass its test, build it again. And so that's how I'd approach it. It is a huge vulnerability for organizations, mostly for their reputation.
I must confess, I can't actually hear what you're saying very well, so hopefully it'll improve as we go down the line.
That makes
what I caught was Kevin, what are you seeing at Alcatel-Lucent? How much of a challenge is it to
Well, I think one of the key things is the term unified. I mean, you're bringing together communication from a vast number of different sources. And I think for the IT security people, this is sort of like a horror show because basically they have to open up their network so that it will enable the unified communication. And that's actually, it's opening up a huge sort of threat surface for various types of attacks. I think I'll give two small examples of that. One of them is the fact that in your network, when you open up something like Link or WebEx or whatever, you're basically bringing people from the outside into your corporate network. And then you can do little things like, I'll let you share my desktop, where they get to see stuff from an internal point of view. And then you can say, well, can you give me control? And you turn over control to this person from the outside. And now they're actually inside the network, able to do stuff. So that's the first major thing, that ability to get inside the network legitimately. Antivirus isn't going to detect that someone's come into the network because it's a legitimate app. They're using it in a legitimate way, but with side effects that are severe. The other thing about unified communications is you have to be able to talk to the infrastructure that supports the unified communications. So you've got the media gateways, you've got session border controllers, you've got servers that are supporting that. These, in order for it to work, these have to be opened up to everyone that's using them, which again is a huge threat vector. People can go in and there's denial of service attacks or stuff that can go on like that. Just one example, in testing this type of equipment, which is sort of what you said, this was about 4 or 5 years ago, but I was testing a media gateway, and I've got a series of denial of service tools, and one of them was launched a land attack. Now, for those of you who were back in the 80s, you might remember what a land attack was. It's sending one packet to a device. Anyway, we sent one at this media gateway, and the whole thing just crashed. So that's the type of threat that you're opening up.
Paul, you obviously, I know that you come from a cybersecurity background, or at least you did at Integralis, and you talked earlier about Internet of Things, and which is kind of part of this. And you just mentioned antivirus wouldn't pick this up, and isn't that part of the problem, that the solutions in cybersecurity space are lagging behind what's happening here?
Yeah, I think it's very true. I think it's interesting you're talking about malware and antivirus. From a security angle, I don't see the difference between bringing UC into the enterprise. Yeah, defense in depth still kicks in regardless of whether it's email, web collaboration, file sharing. The problem is still the same. Yeah, you might have SBCs from Sonus and other organizations, but it's understanding what the threat is. Yeah, and bringing the outside in is really problematic. And I do a lot of work for UK government, and it just doesn't happen. Yeah, you can have web collaboration, but it's in a dark room with only one computer and one video camera with no whiteboards, because they're concerned about what can be seen from the outside. You know, in a darkened room, when you're only talking to people on the outside, then you've got no concerns about file sharing, lack of information. I was listening to Phil's presentation earlier on about privacy. Yeah, so all these things that we're talking about, we used to from an enterprise, no different taking those technologies and those controls to UC. If you don't do that, then in some ways you deserve what you get.
Phil, you as Paul just mentioned, you talked a lot about privacy just now, and you talked about how governments are trying to, get people to hand over data, but they're on a losing wicket here, aren't they, with UC EXPO? Sorry, not with UC EXPO, with Unified Communications. It's yet another challenge for governments.
You say a challenge for government. Are you referring to a challenge for intel agencies, or?
Yeah.
Well,
I'm not saying it's necessarily a good challenge. I'm just saying.
Well, okay, but I'd like to remind you that those same intel agencies, as well as military and law enforcement, they have a need for protecting their own communications too. If we're in the business of providing solutions for them to protect their communications, I mean, think of it as body armor. I'm in the business of building very good body armor. Well, that means that bad guys could wear that same body armor. So, what I often run into is that everybody wants good, strong crypto for themselves, but they don't want anyone else to have it. Governments, they want it for themselves, but they don't want anyone else to have it. And I think that's crazy. If you try to build things that are strong against outside attack, not only the government that's going to have it, everybody's going to have it.
Roger, let me just...
The governments don't pay enough money to pay all the salaries of the security industry to make stuff just for them. I mean, strictly from a business perspective, we need to make money, and we can make money by selling it to everybody. So, the government just isn't a big enough customer to pay the bills for us.
Okay, I'm going to a little bit technical now, Roger. Change it. I've told that there are things free IP PBX software, asterisk tricks box, cool generation tools that all have SIP access that have lowered the barrier of entry for attackers. Is that?
It certainly is. I mean, we're aware of a number of instances where some freeware SIP-based PBXs, particularly in Eastern Europe, have been used to attack a range of different providers. Basically, you get hold of a PBX and you get it to start firing calls at people. And so the first thing that you need to do as an enterprise or a government agency is have something that can actually look at these calls that are coming in and start to see a pattern of where they're coming from, even though they can be distributed, of course. But most of the SIP signaling you see in there still contains a number of common pieces, so we can understand a denial of service attack. Session border controller is acting like a voice firewall on the edge of the network to mitigate some of that. So we are seeing the compromising of, and I'm not having a go at open source before everybody thinks I'm some sort of mad vendor guy, but the open source PBXs that have been put up by possibly geeky hobbyists may have not been done with all the best practices in the world. So.
Oh, you mean they're done it with the best intentions?
Oh yeah, they've put their asterisk in for a very good reason, but then someone's compromised it and used it to maybe just continuously ring Scotland Yard hour after hour after hour, and it costs the person who's doing it nothing, and the person with the asterisk PBX eventually thinks, hold on, something's going on.
Yeah.
Hopefully they do anyway. So
I just open the question to anyone jump in, but how big an opportunity is this for cyber criminals? Things like telephony denial of service is something that is a new thing to me. So if we close them down on one angle, then they'll switch to this. DDoS versus TDoS.
But from a Unify perspective, we've seen it firsthand with toll fraud. Yeah, I know everybody's seen the original fame war games where the guy picks a phone up and taps it out on the phone. Yeah, the modern day version of that is hacking SIP trunks and be able to make free calls. I think guy from Sonus mentioned it as mentioned around SBCs and the configuration. So we see it as a major issue with toll frauds, people trying to get something for nothing by misconfiguration in the telephone switches. Yeah, so it's a real, it's something that's happening today, and it's costing businesses hundreds of thousands, if not millions of pounds.
I think one of the major sort of threats that it opens up today is like, in this sort of regular enterprise security, everybody's talking about advanced persistent threats, people breaking into the network for purposes of cyber espionage. And there's been so many breaches last year that it's just, I mean, this is actually happening. So although DDoS, I think, is a threat, that's basically, but to me, that's sort of like doing mischief. You're disrupting the network. It's actually the theft of information and getting inside the network and being able to maneuver inside the network. That the unified communications infrastructure provides an additional, a huge opportunity for that.
I think if we want to protect ourselves going forward, we've got to be thinking much more in a much more agile way about how we develop our networks and how we develop our security. And encryption is, and Paul made the point earlier that many of the older firewall at the front door approaches don't necessarily work anymore, and we need to secure the things that are inside our infrastructures and inside our organizations, secure them at the point that we want them to be secure. And that means giving some things that are going to be insecure. So if we want to make encrypted phone calls, then we need to be able to be able to undertake and do that. But there are elements of what we do on our mobile phones and on our computers, on our laptops and tablets that frankly don't need to be secure. And so I think we're going to have to develop much more canny, much more active and intuitive approaches to security in a unified environment.
Phil, are people taking this seriously? I mean, they hear a lot every day about what I might call conventional cyber attacks. Are businesses waking up to the threats through this vector?
What kind of attacks are you talking about?
What I would call, like phishing attacks or denial of service, the stuff that takes down Target or JP Morgan.
It's very difficult to protect against a distributed denial of service attack. I don't know how to protect against it. there are people that specialize in defenses against that, but it's very hard even for them.
What I meant was, is there an awareness that they could be attacked through this method as much as what they read about?
Oh, well, is there awareness that DDoS is
Yeah,
part of the threat model? Yeah, everybody knows that, sure.
No, not DDoS. Like using telephone systems to, rather than what they expect is through malware.
You mean phones being infected with malware?
No, maybe I'm reading this wrong, but...
Sorry, could we turn up the volume on this?
Yeah.
Because I can barely hear. Maybe I'm getting old and I can't hear as well.
Well, I think the problem is two of us on this panel are actually deaf in one ear as well. So
Yeah, I'm deaf in my right ear, and I think
this is the most unlikely boy band you're ever going to see in your life. No, what I'm saying is, we hear every day about malware attacks on businesses.
Yeah.
We don't hear quite so much, or at least I haven't heard quite so much about attacks via unified communication systems. And I was just wondering if businesses are aware that this is a threat as well.
Attacks by you're looking up
I
here.
keep looking at UC. So
Yeah.
such as what this asterisk, tricks box, SIP access, brute forcing IVRs.
Yeah, there's a
that sort of
huge
stuff.
number of vulnerabilities in voice over IP systems. SIP servers can be attacked in so many ways. There's there's a textbook on SIP security that's kind of an encyclopedia of attacks on SIP. Denial of service, toll fraud, shutting down call centers, things like that. I don't work on that because it's so daunting.
Yeah. That's okay.
if I can pick up on that, I mean, I think we get called in at the point where organisations' hairs are on fire, and I think there's a far wider understanding of the issues, but I think less of an understanding about how do they really protect against them, and what are the strategies that they can deploy in their IT networks to actually make themselves more secure, because by its very nature, they want to remain as open and easy and access to their e-commerce programs, e-commerce platforms as they possibly can. And so those characteristics of securing an environment are changing, and they're changing quite dramatically. And I think the organisations kind of are falling victim to hacks and attacks, becoming far more. The headlines we see is the tip of the iceberg. Everybody's suffering. This is a pain in the backside to everybody. And the question is, how do we go about making a far more secure internet? And I don't know. I mean, Paul, you mentioned earlier. You said that the old way of doing it is it's finished. It doesn't work anymore. We have to find another way to secure ourselves. And I think that's where we're at. That's the reality.
Yeah, and I think particularly in the fact with unified communications, the firewall's no good. It has to let it in. If the firewall blocks it, no one's communicating. So I think you're going to see going forward, it's going to be security in the network, security close to the devices. Each device will have to secure itself. You're going to have to monitor the network communications internally to see if there's any abuses or violations going on. So I think that's the technology that you're going to see coming down the pike that's going to address that.
And I've got a point on that. For those of you who are familiar with software-defined networks, that what is called flow-based networking really allows you to define across the network exactly where it's going to talk to where others. So it's almost the opposite of a network we have today, where you can power traffic in and it can go everywhere. In an SDN network, you've got defined flows, and traffic can only go down those roads, if you like, down certain pathways. And I think that's another layer of security that is going to be a possibility in the future as software-defined networking comes out and allows you that much more granular control as well.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's about analysing people's behaviour, understanding what good looks like. And if you understand what good looks like, then you look for then you can start looking at anomalies. So that if people do get into your network and you know what good looks like, looking at the SDN type services or the flows, this is what a normal flow looks like, then all of a sudden you start seeing these spikes going out, then you know something's wrong. It doesn't necessarily mean that a hack's happened. It just means that flow is different to what you would expect normally.
One thing I read a report that in Texas, a number of emergency dispatch centers were disabled because of an attack, which is quite scary. And this seemed to be done for no better reason than just to disrupt the emergency services. If they can do that, then presumably they could get into much like airport systems. Is that a worry?
I think it is. You know, I mentioned before an Asterix attack and used the example of Scotland Yard. You can find this on the BBC website. This is a TDOS attack has already happened on Scotland Yard about 3 years ago.
Oh, really?
And as some of you will know, that the guys from Birmingham who did it are now at Her Majesty's pleasure. Not smart enough to cover their tracks, but smart enough to wind up the police. So it does happen. So.
Okay, we've got some time left for some questions, so we have one straight away here in the front row, please.
Thank you. Sorry.
That's fine.
Just wanted to make
The
sure the
louder
volume was there. Telephone hacking has to be one of the oldest technology hacks around. Phone phreaking and telephone hackers have been around for a long time, still have a long-standing journal of their own. 2600, I think, is still in publication. So we've probably just made it a lot easier to join the telephone hackers with the computer hackers in unified communication. But could we overreact? If we start from the point of view that you'll never have a fully secure system, what's an acceptable amount of risk in this area?
Who wants to? Do you want to address that to anyone? Or
Risk is very much a personal, organizational thing. Yeah, just because one organization, take financials, have got deep pockets, lot to lose, they're going to spend a lot of money putting defenses in place. Whereas a local authority may not have as deep pockets, but the threat of someone stealing information is just as valid, but it's not on the same scale as a financial organization. So the threat is there, but each organization needs to consider how they manage their own risk and put the appropriate controls in place in order to support the threat.
Yeah. One really good way to address the issue is to realize that you should actually split your network into at least two major parts. One is where you keep the crown jewels, which is all your data and stuff, and that communications network should be on the outside. It shouldn't really have access. So I'd separate them, keep them as two.
The question here, please.
Hello, yes. Thank you. I really do believe that the cloud can be quite dangerous, as we have discussed, that secret data can leak out to the world. I really see that every person in the world has a set of kitchen knives to be used for proper purposes. But every kitchen knife could stab anybody in the back at any time. What we need are moral controls to know that as soon as we make a move against use that kitchen knife in an illegal way, that we know that we're in trouble. So, we need an authority, I believe, to control that data is used for good and legal purposes, and that it doesn't hurt. What helps everybody and harms nobody is good for everybody.
Okay, so I think you're asking for some kind of regulation?
I believe so.
Okay.
Similar to like a doctor cannot talk about his patient's data to anybody. He has an authority that tells him that data is strictly between him and the patient, etc.
So you want that for
Similar, yes, similar.
all of industry, kind of?
Somehow we have to have a moral stand.
Oh, yeah. A moral standard for data protection.
I think he's absolutely right. This is all about people, process, and tools, isn't it? And the people and the process that you undertake in your own environment, and you allow your own people to communicate with, are critical. And the tools we use is one of the three characteristics. Sorry, Paul.
Phil, were you was getting perhaps more into a moral issue? I don't know how you would create a worldwide regulation. I mean, people have tried.
Well, if we can transition from, the legislative environment should not have pressure on it to put in backdoors. If we have a wholehearted endorsement of protecting data in our legislative and public policy space, then it would help close the doors for all these various attacks. I mean, take for example, Google had backdoors that they put in for law enforcement, which, I mean, they would put them in because law enforcement asked them to put them in.
Yeah.
But some years ago, the Chinese used those, they hijacked that apparatus to spy on Chinese dissidents. When you have backdoors into systems, you weaken them. And so, you know, if you look at the balance of power between the defenders and the attackers have the upper hand. And they've had the upper hand for quite some time, and it's getting worse all the time. We need all the help we can get. Even if we do this, what I would suggest, it might not be enough, but we have to at least do that. We have to have, you know, a wholehearted endorsement in public policy that we have to defend systems from, you know, no backdoors, defend, you know, we want phone companies, we want Alcatel-Lucent, for example, phone carriers, everybody that has kind of participated in a culture of giving access to government, you know, backdoor access, to seal off those, seal off the entire, you know, every possible place that you can find, and try to make them as secure as possible.
It's a huge area. We could actually have a whole panel debate on just that subject alone. I've got one more question just here, please.
We just mentioned that the data and voice should be kept separate, but are we not going back to 1980s when it was actually separated? So where is true unified communication? I believe true unified communication is integration of data, voice, and video. But if we still feel today in 2015 that the data has to be separated from voice and video, I think we're still in 1980s then.
So if we're separating the data, we're undermining the whole concept of this. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. If we're separating the data, then it's not a true unified communication. It is back 1980s, where we had telephone copper lines and we had data networks.
Okay.
So it's not truly unified communication any longer.
Okay, thank Daryl. You want to come in on that?
I was just about to say we're going to have to change the name of the show. The Almost Unified Communications
Nearly,
Expo.
nearly.
So,
Separate data.
I think the point of segregation of a network is really that it depends on your perspective of it, and there are areas of your communications that need tighter security than others. And it's that segregation that I think we were referring to, rather than running parallel streams. The unified element talks about them being IP, perhaps, rather than IP and PSTN.
Yeah, there are technical controls in place. You've got voice and data. We're not saying that the two will never meet. When the touch points they do meet, you use technologies, media gateways, SBCs as alike, to securely intercommunicate that data between those two different boundaries. From security level, anyone from the public services, impact levels, all those sorts of things, from secret to top secret, there are controls in place and technologies out there that allow you to securely exchange information from one impact level to another impact level securely without compromising the unified comms.
Yeah. One final question. Got 2 minutes. If you could just.
Okay, my question is for Phil, and it goes directly to the point you just made of eliminating the backdoors. We just, in the physical world, witnessed a disastrous event where a system that was specifically designed to lock out the bad guys allowed an insider to hijack an airplane with disastrous effects. How do we prevent something like this if we're eliminating the backdoors?
That's to Phil, is it? You're asking Phil?
Yeah, that's a good question.
I know.
When I look when I look at that particular incident, as an engineer, I see it as kind of a mechanical engineer thing. I think you could do it maybe with cockpit procedures, like require a second person in the cockpit, maybe a flight attendant, for example, who could open the door if somebody was trying to get in. So, I look at that as kind of an engineering problem. You can do something like that. I don't think that we should take that and extrapolate that to say that that we should have back doors. I mean, that's
Okay.
it's only a very loose analogy.
So you're
Okay,
saying we should
I'm-
build super secure
Okay. I'm gonna have to,
encryption and sell it to everyone without any...
Yeah. I'm going to have to
Access
wrap
for
this up.
third
I'm
parties.
sorry, sir. You can certainly talk to Phil after this, but we are really out of time and we have to get the next session up. But thank you all for your questions. Thanks very much to the panel. It was an excellent session. Thank you. And I know happy hour balloons are up, and so that's a very good sign. Thank you, guys.